Hi, I'm Colin Sapp, and this is Coffee Talk.
Hi everyone, I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. As usual, we are joined by Cheryl Bailey, assistant chair of guitar. Hey Cheryl, good morning.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
And Ian Steed, our senior coordinator.
Hey,
Woo.
folks.
Yeah. And today our guest is associate professor of guitar Colin Sapp. Hey Colin,
Hi,
welcome. It's great to see you.
thanks. Great to see all of you.
There's a lot to discuss with teaching and playing and gear and all kinds of things. Colin, we're going to start with our question. We ask everyone, are you a coffee drinker? And what do you value?
Well, I do have my guitar department mug,
Ooh.
of course, because I had to represent, right? There you go, Ian. There we go.
Hmm.
I am not a coffee drinker. Um, so, yeah, it's one of those things that I just never got into, and I stopped drinking caffeine in my teenage years. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think my energy levels are already through the roof, so I think caffeine would be a bad addition to that balance.
So do you hydrate? Is that what you're drinking right now? Like water?
Yes, I'll do
Mhm.
decaf tea, but I am drinking just the old clear stuff.
That is not, you're not unique in that. And this program, there are a few others who are like, they just go right for the hydration, which I think is really great. Because I think, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the people who follow you on social media and stuff do know that you really, when you go for food, you really go in
It's a
pretty
true
deep.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm big foodie, big wine guy.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I love finding all the cool spots.
Mhm. Is it like going to the places, or is it actually like matching the flavors for you, or what really attracted you to that?
Um, well, I actually was in the wine industry for a brief moment in the early 2000s. Um, I had graduated from Berkeley in '02, and actually I didn't graduate. I stopped with I had just general education credits left, and so I finished all my music classes, and then I went out into the world. I had a teaching gig at the Boston Arts Academy, and I was gigging 5 nights a week on a dinner cruise. So I was gainfully employed, but those things kind of dried up, and I was getting into wine through just wine tastings, and actually some friends that were students from Europe at Berkeley. I was a little bit older at Berkeley. I was 23 when I came in. Um, so they were also a little bit older too, and I'd never had wine. I'm from Flint, Michigan. Like it's not a thing that people did there in the 1990s and early 2000s. Now it's kind of more of a thing, I guess. I don't know. But point being, like they turned me on to wine when the music thing wasn't going so well for me. I took a gig as a wine salesman, and I got a really good education that way. And a big crossroads moment was when the restaurant Davio's in town was looking for like a wine manager, and one of my friends had recommended me for the gig, and I was like, wow, if I do that, that is going to change my whole trajectory. I'm no longer going to do music. I'm going to do wine. I want to get good at wine. I'm going to need to learn this stuff because it's a deep world. And I decided to follow my heart and stick with guitar and music, and it ended up working out right. But point being, I still love wine. I still love pairing the foods with the wines. The atmosphere is important, but it's not as important as the flavors. If the execution isn't there, then the atmosphere can't make up for it.
It's this is so great listening to you talk about this because so we call this coffee talk for a variety of reasons, right? Like one being that in the pandemic, we really missed hanging out by the coffee maker in the office and hanging out with all of you. And the students missed being able to drop in on that. So we recreated it. But then in doing coffee talk, a lot of the way that people would talk about their coffee bared some kind of relationship for
Totally.
a lot of people to the way they thought about music. And when you're talking about food and wine, it just really strikes me like how deep you went into that, how deep I know that you go into the sounds you make. We're going to get you talking about gear and pedals and sounds because the way that you use them isn't just to paint over or create a tone electronically that doesn't exist in your hands. You have this way of really seeing those things as part of your instrument and musicianship. And and I think that's really interesting also that you said that the atmosphere matters less than the flavors because I think that you have found a way to bring your sound to gigs as a sideman, a soloist, the classroom, all kinds of different venues and sound like yourself. So I think this one really holds, Cheryl. I think Colin really holds up as a across the board. Do you think that's true, or do you find that, Colin? Do you find that like in a lot of the things you care about some of the same things?
Well, thank you first and foremost. Those were actually that was very complimentary. That meant a lot to me to hear that from you. And it's only been probably within like the last 10 years that really kind of uh, was apparent to me. I think probably some friends pointed it out, like, oh, you're really geeky about your senses, about what you hear, about what you taste, about what you smell, and I don't know where that really came from. I remember going back to Flint to visit my mom, and she always said that I was a super picky eater as a kid, and now I'm like eating like charred octopus, and she's like, "Who are you?" And I don't know. The cuisine wasn't totally on point in Michigan for one thing. Sorry, all my Michigan family and friends, but like back then it was a lot of just fried stuff. We didn't have a lot of diversity in our cuisine back then either. We had one Chinese restaurant that came up in the 1990s, and that was it. That was the only game in town. Otherwise, it's just like you eat at home, or you eat at family gatherings, or you eat fast food. And like there was good stuff at home, and there was good stuff at family gatherings, but it's still kind of limited, right? It's limited to what your family cooks. Once I got to Boston, I mean, it's one of the greatest food cities in the world, bar none. Really amazing. I started trying all these things just because I was like, what is, you know, broccoli rabe? I don't know what that is. And yeah, like it kind of it appealed to the artistic side, right? And I think we are artists at our core. I think that's what makes us really unique and special. And I think people in all different disciplines are artists too. And I appreciate the chefs and the winemakers on the same level as the artists that we see in museums or that we see on stage. It's all this, in my mind, it's all the same craftsmanship and energy, years and years of refining yourself to get to a point where it creates a very special moment for a person.
You know, Colin, I think that I feel like I relate to what you're saying, not just with food, but with music. That for me, I had as broad of a musical experience as I could have in my little town. And then it was when I went to college and met people from all over the world and all over the country that um, that's not just when I started eating different food because they introduced me to food, but it's when I started hearing different sounds.
Right.
And this really beautifully dovetails into the next question that we'd love for students to hear about was, what about your beginning at Berkeley? Do you remember like a moment in your first days and did that experience hold true musically for you too? Did you come here and hear a lot of things that were new to you?
Yeah. Oh man, Berkeley. I mean, it changed my life. It really did. Especially coming from uh, Michigan in the 1990s, where there, this is kind of at the front edge of the internet. The internet wasn't really cooking at that point. It was there, but it was not like it is today. Meaning there was no YouTube, there were no tab websites or anything. So informationally, I was self-taught, and I had a lot of gaps, and I listened to a lot of music growing up, and I figured a lot of stuff out by ear, and I got okay at the guitar on my own, but I hit a wall, especially when I went to my brother's community college jazz band to basically just play guitar without enrolling. And I realized, wow, they're putting charts in front of me that have chord symbols that don't make any sense to me. The tempos are fast. Of course, it has pitches on there that I don't know how to read music. All that stuff. I realized that, wow, I'm not a like legit musician, and that put me on a few years quest to figure out like, okay, what are my holes? How do I kind of like spackle those? And I hit a wall. I just couldn't teach myself. I taught myself rock. I taught myself blues. I couldn't teach myself jazz, and because there was a lot of stuff that informationally I just couldn't get my hands on, and I didn't know about Berkeley until one of my friends said, "Oh yeah, I just went out and auditioned for Berkeley. I think I'm going to go there in the fall." I'm like, "What's Berkeley?" They said, "Oh, well, it's like you can play like guitar there," which most universities and colleges back then, like they didn't really have electric guitar. Like you could study classical guitar, or you could study like with one teacher at the school. And he told me, no, like you can study rock, you can study blues, jazz, and I was like, how many teachers are there? Like I don't know, like 400. I'm like, what? I was like, I gotta go there. And as soon as I hit uh, the pavement in at Logan, I was like, this city is amazing. The city won me over immediately, even though it was dreary and rainy in March. A cold, rainy season here in Boston. But then I just loved it. I fell in love with the town, and then I did the tour. I did the Berkeley tour, and I saw all the students with the cases on their back, and I was like, these are my people. This is the scene. And my first week there, I met so many people that even before classes started, that are still friends of mine to this day. And I've made music with them for now, what, 22 years? It's transformative to say the least. There's not a word that really encapsulates how important Berkeley was for me.
Cheryl, I'm seeing you smile and laugh and nod a lot along with Colin, and I'm wondering what's on your mind as he's telling that first week story.
Well, I mean, I came from Pittsburgh area, which might be in some ways similar,
Yeah, Pittsburgh's great.
right? Rust Belt, I guess they call it. Um, and um, and that whole thing, even just talking about food, and I mean, I was lucky to be hear a lot of music, but I like what you're expressing about actually to tie that into the thing about the food and the wine and the coffee, but that you went and studied that and you realized there was a whole world like that openness to and also I know that feeling like coming from a small town feeling and you just you're hungry for some there's a big menu.
Yes.
You want to check it out and you come to the city and but that you have that curiosity and to start even like thinking about you were playing guitar and then you got into wine, there were a lot of questions you had to start as a beginner, like not having that fear to be a beginner
Mm.
to because there's all this stuff, it's complex, you don't understand it, but to be able to ask those questions. So I'm just curious because that is so much a part of your journey, how you work with students in that way in terms of getting them to be in this space where they can ask questions, and how do you explore that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is kind of unique about Berkeley too. I've taught at many places, over the past. Well, I started teaching when I was technically 12, giving lessons to like my friend's older brother. But, you know, I've taught in public schools. I've taught in like after school music programs. I've taught at music stores. Um, Berkeley has a unique student population. And you use the word hungry in a metaphorical sense, and yeah, they are all really eager to learn, and they have an open mindedness to them. And so, I think that's one of the best parts of being at Berkeley is I feel like we are all kind of collectively learning together. Like I learned so much from watching you, Cheryl, and you, Kim. It just and then I hear you playing through the door sometimes, Ian. I'm always checking people. Everybody's checking everybody out and like picking each other's brains when we can in the hallways or watching each other perform in concerts or clinics. Man, Berkeley is amazing for that because it is just like this family of people where we can continue to learn from each other. And I never got my doctorate like you did, Kim, but I feel like teaching at Berkeley is kind of like my doctorate program, and it probably I'll never obviously finish that degree, and I'll never get a piece of paper for it. But I feel like that is my journey right now is to learn as much as I can from everybody at Berkeley.
That's a really great way of putting it, Colin, because the whole idea of a doctorate that some people aren't thinking about all the time is that you're making a contribution to your field, right? And you're developing something that's unique to you, but that really contributes to what to the way that we're all moving forward together. And I think that's it, right? Is that to keep finding ways to make those connections for students because at our school, I think we have this unique, maybe it's not unique to everywhere, but we value the idea that people are going to find different traditions to bring together in their own way. And that's the whole value system of the education as opposed to copying and then later finding your way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why it works is because faculty members like you are thinking about that every day. Like, how do I get better at helping people sort of absorb all of this information that they need so deeply and then become themselves? Like, not do
Yeah.
one or the other, right?
Right, right.
And so, Ian, usually kind of more towards the end, Ian asks this question every time, but I think it might be the perfect time.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this question that we ask everybody that's maybe can be your thesis here. But what is something that students should be thinking about that they're not thinking about, or a question that they should be asking that they wouldn't think to ask?
Jeez. Yeah. Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Basically, I think maybe if I reframe the question, it's like, what would you tell somebody um, that to look out for or to maybe think about that they wouldn't normally think about? And Kim, you were just talking about uniqueness, and finding your own voice, and that is one of the hardest things to do. And you're right, when we're at the crucible, which is Berkeley, and I've been through that gauntlet. We tend to focus on learning and all of the rules and copying all of the greats so we can build techniques and we can build our understanding. But it's really, really important that you figure out what makes you unique. What's your unique perspective as an artist, as a musician? And once you discover that uniqueness, you need to embrace it and develop it because it's not fully formed. You might have an interesting angle, but it's probably still very rough, and it's going to take years to develop that. The balance that you need to strike as a student at Berkeley is, of course, you need to fulfill all your requirements. You need to, you know, get all the traditional counterpoint and traditional harmony, and then, of course, do all of the ear training and harmony, contemporary harmony classes. Get those down so you know them solidly. Learn transcriptions, learn your favorite artist stuff, but then try to see around that corner, whatever that corner is for you. Take a left or take a right and develop something that's unique for yourself, and keep honing that skill and that voice. I think that's what the world needs. We need unique voices. We do not need clones. We don't need people who follow the rules. We need to learn the rules, but then we need to break the rules, right? And I think it's tough to do that in 4 years in an undergraduate program. You know what I mean? It's not a master's program, where you're becoming a master, although depending on where you are before you go to Berkeley, you might be taking it to a whole nother level by the time you leave Berkeley. But for me, personally, I wasn't mastering anything while I was at Berkeley. I was struggling just to, keep up with all of these concepts that I was learning. And I always say to students who are struggling that that is the reality of Berkeley. It's drinking from the fire hose, which is a common expression around Berkeley. And it's also like, just a small snippet of your life. 4 years is a drop in the bucket. You live 80 years, let's say. 4 years is hardly a blip on that timeline. It took me 5 years to fully process, practice, and master the concepts that I learned when I was a student at Berkeley. So given the time I started at Berkeley, 4 years plus the 5 years after trying to just develop that and figure it out and turn it into like my own toolkit where I can then create music with, that's 9 years. And that's a serious arc as far as like commitment to developing your sound. So just know that you've got all the time in the world. Take as long as you need and develop your sound so you can contribute something unique to the world.
Colin, when you were out of Berkeley and you were working on these 5 years and then plus after that, developing your sound and then starting to do different types of gigs. So I hope people go out and listen to the tracks that we're collecting of yours, and we're putting them on our playlist and stuff so
Cool.
you can hear them. But just to summarize, you've done band leader things, you've done some pretty high profile sideman stuff that maybe in different styles than is your main.
Yeah.
You've also played with some very strong personalities, like in duo, that also might not be quite exactly what you do. And you've played like theater shows, those kinds of gigs. While you were doing all of those things, and still now, you're teaching at a number of different places at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I think a lot of people are afraid when they get out, like, will I find any work? And then the second fear is like the opposite. Like, will I find so much work that I don't have time to develop who I am on the instrument? And so as someone who has done that, and I mean, I think what you're saying too is that, all of us are continuing to develop who we are on the instrument. So it's not like it has a end. But how did you do that? Like, especially at that point when you're coming out and you're trying to like, you feel like, okay, I'm just going to take what comes, but I'm still trying to find out who I am. Like, did you have a practice strategy that allowed you to do that? What did you do?
Yeah. Well, I think I was very fortunate that I had gigs that allowed me to work on certain facets of my musicianship. And I would recommend that people find a music project that aligns with their personal musical goals. for me, that group was Choose to Find, and it was one of the people that I was referring to in my first week that I met before classes, Todd Marston. Uh, I immediately bonded with him on just personality wise. He was quirky, goofy, funny, awesome dude, and we got on right away. But then we started playing together. He's a piano player, and I was like, this guy has such a great sensitivity to play with guitar players. Like he's listening and he's kind of complimenting rather than just playing. I find it's sometimes difficult to play with certain piano players because they're, we kind of have the same role in the band. We can play chords, we can play rhythm, we can play melody, we can cover that whole ground. If we play duo together, we can't both be emptying our pitchers into the metaphorical water glass, right? We have to take turns, and he could do that just without any communication. He was just doing that. He founded a band in 2005 called Choose to Find, and I went to their first gig, and they didn't have a guitar player, and I loved the music, and I went back to my studio, and I recorded I just wrote a bunch of guitar parts for these songs, recorded them, and sent them to Todd, and said, "Check this out." And he's like, "Okay, that's cool." He ended up liking what I did and making me a member of the band, and then we ended up recording a couple records together over the next several years. Toured through the United States and did a lot of cool development on our own sounds, and that project helped me really deep dive on becoming a better musician because his compositions were challenging, but also get into sound, developing a unique sound. So if you can find a project that you can do a deep dive on where everybody's on the same page and you are hashing it out for hours and hours and hours a week together as if it's your full-time job, that I think will help to develop you as a musician, rather than just sitting in your room and practicing, which is important. But let's face it, when you can kind of be, it turns into like an airlock situation where there's no feedback coming in, and you don't really understand the greater context with what you're doing. You're just becoming a monster player, but maybe not as deep of a musician as you could be in that sense. So for me, I think that was the turning moment when I found that project. And of course, I still had to work my gigs and my day jobs and stuff like that while I was doing that gig. But this was my development outlet, or whatever you want to call it.
I think I would really love it if you spent some time talking about sound and pedals.
Yes.
Because you are our departmental expert in pedals. And so I just want everyone to know that I'm here to learn, and I'm going to defer to Cheryl and Ian for the follow-up questions. But can you just, I think so many of our students, they're enamored with this idea of having pedals. Colin teaches the effects lab at Berkeley. And so you're kind of sometimes taking people through a tour of different pedals their first time.
Yes.
But I'd love to know, what's your general perspective on this? Are there certain things you think everyone should really know how to use? And what's your kind of philosophy about using gear to enhance your tone and your sound?
That's an awesome question, and it's probably going to be a crazy long answer, but I'll try to distill it down. I think Berkeley is, first and foremost, the focus is to become a great musician, right? Like to develop every student as a great musician. If you're in the performance track, right? Obviously, there's different majors, but if you're in the performance division, you are there to get good at your instrument. And I think the music world needs great musicians, clearly, but there's a relatively new phenomenon, which is, you're sculpting your sound as an electric guitarist. 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, that wasn't as possible, right? It was just starting to happen with amps and pedals emerging on the market, that you could actually, like, people could have different sounds, right? Before that, it was just everybody tried to find their own way of playing uniquely. Now it's gone to the point where we can shape our sounds texturally, to the extreme. Like, there's so many variables that we can craft our own unique sound. People like the Edge from U2 and Eddie Van Halen, and I'm forgetting the guitar player from Muse. Okay, no help. But anyways, like, all these people are just taking their Vernon Reid from Living Color. All these folks just took the equipment and made it enhance their playing, right? And they're not covering anything up. They're using it as another instrument or an extension of their instrument. So I always tell my students in the effects lab that, yes, cultivate your musicianship. Make sure that you can just play the living crap out of your instrument, but don't neglect developing your unique signature sound or sounds, or your ability to get signature sounds with different effects, amps, guitars, etc. Because it will set you apart in the music world. If you have that unique signature, people will definitely ask you to get involved with their musical project.
Here's my question, Colin. Signal chain.
Yes.
Wah before distortion or after? Before or after?
Yeah. I mean, conventionally people put wah first, because it doesn't, your distortion is, or any kind of clipping pedal is going to maintain its sonic profile that way. You're basically just shaping your guitar sound and then you're distorting it, right? But if you listen to Custard Pie by Led Zeppelin, and Jimmy Page used in Hendrix, they used their wah first and then their fuzzes after, and then their amp after that, right? But on Custard Pie, on Physical Graffiti, it sounds to me like the fuzz is first and the wah is afterwards, because it's like this wah, 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 really, really filtering that sound extremely. So it depends what you want to get, and that's true, I think, with any combination of effects. Most people would put your filtering effects first, and then your distortion, and then your modulation, and then your ambience. But there's really cool sounds to be had if you mix all of those things up in different directions. Eddie used his phaser and flanger before his amp, right? So that's modulation before distortion. If you put a reverb pedal into a distortion pedal, it gets this really otherworldly, like, chaotic sound. I kind of like that sometimes. Would I use that on, like a wedding gig or something like that? Like, no, probably not, unless, we're like a Radiohead cover band that they hired or something. But, it's the convention is the convention for a reason. It gets you these kind of tried and true sounds. But I think the rule is to experiment. Break those rules is the rule.
Yeah, I think that's the big question, right? Because until you take that time to rip everything apart and put it back together and see what it sounds like, you know what I mean? I think that is the study of those effects. I mean, obviously, you're a master at that and sharing that with students. And also just the impedance, the impedance from, if you wire one way or the other, it's cleaner, or one thing is pulling all the the sound out of it.
Yeah.
How did you learn? I mean, did you learn that stuff from listening to recordings and exploring it, or just more of discussions and nerding out with it? I mean, how do you go about, how did you, for instance, that example of that Zeppelin tune, Is that something that you said, oh, what is that sound? And then tried to recreate it?
I think this is kind of interesting, full circle back to the beginning of our conversation. Um, One of my gigs after the wine stuff was being a mastering engineer. I went into the studio world because I love recording. It's just one of my things, and that's what I really went into. I did a lot of gigs and stuff like that, but I loved being in studios. I loved recording. I loved doing records, and so I got a gig as a mastering engineer for, geez, I guess it was about 9 years, maybe 10 years that I was a mastering engineer. And in mastering, you don't make sweeping changes, radical changes to the audio, because you can destroy someone's record that they've been spending months, if not years, on, and thousands of dollars. And the mix engineer really has the sweeping changes, and the tracking engineer, they kind of set the sounds. What you want to do is you want to polish it up. And so the equipment that you use at the mastering stage is very, very finely adjustable. And all of those sounds, you just turn it maybe a half a dB just to kind of carve a little. You're just shaping it, putting the final wax and buff on the car as it's leaving the paint facility. So that to me kind of dialed in my sensibilities for not only just audio stuff, but just life in general. Like, wow, you can really, like, just a slight tweak to this joke and it's funnier. A comedian talks about their process of making something funnier by just one twist in there, and it makes it that much more laughable. So the way I learned it is just by doing it. And because I was in studios a lot and around a lot of gear, I was building my own gear and studios too over time. I could tweak the actual sounds, and I could hear the differences between what my different ideas were. I could come up with a hypothesis, and then I could experiment and figure out if that was actually, if my logic was accurate or if it was faulty, and then I would learn from there. And then after that, it just kind of snowballed. I kept acquiring more gear and doing more experiments, doing more recording, and then pretty soon I had like a bunch of recordings and a bunch of gear and a bunch of knowledge from that. So learning by doing was how I got a little bit better at it.
Do you know a lot about, like, this is maybe a diversion. I mean, you're talking about like sort of just through the process and the practice, but how much do you know like about electronics? Because like I see that big sea of pedals behind you. Cheryl said a word, impedance, which scares the pants off me. Like, you know, like I, as a Luddite flat top player, like I know about woods and what woods make what sounds and the bracing patterns in guitars, but y'all start talking about like pickups and like resistance and stuff, and it starts to really scare me. Like,
Yeah.
so how much do you know about like electronics, and like how much would you need, like if somebody wants to know more about pedals or crafting their sound in the way that you're talking about, like how much of that stuff should they dive into?
Ooh. Well, my pandemic project, when I realized that we were going to be in lockdown for an extended amount of time, an indefinite amount of time, I wanted to scratch the itch that I had about all of my amplifiers and my pedals. I wanted to know. I have talked. I was lucky to. I think the more you get into a scene, into a music scene, the more people you meet, right? So not only musicians, but you meet people who design equipment and build equipment. And I loved having these nerdy conversations, even though everything that they were saying was basically going over my head. It was intriguing to me. and I would open up, like my Princeton reverb or my Vibrolux reverb or whatever, and you can just pull those chassis right out. Now you just got to be careful, like not to touch anything, because sometimes those capacitors can have a lot of voltage in them, and that could be lethal. But I had friends that told me, just look, don't touch, right? Just, you can pull it out, and I'll go through and tell you what is what. But it still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then I ordered some books. I built an old man workbench in my basement last year, and I started doing all of that stuff, reading about it, and experimenting first off with pedals, because there's low voltage, you won't get zapped that way, and then doing amp maintenance on a couple of my amps that needed some work. And I feel like I have a better understanding now of why things sound the way they sound. And in fact, I was just setting up for, I'm going to shoot a video later today about the Dallas Arbiter fuzz face and what each component does. Now, there's not many components there. There's two potentiometers. There are, looks like, three capacitors, four resistors, and two transistors. That's it. What is that? Like 12 components, or not even? So if you swap one of those things out for a different value, how does that impact the sound? And I'm still learning about that. I'm still figuring out, especially in more complicated circuits, how one change, affects other things down the signal chain. And that's why there's such a diverse amount of electronics available to shape our sound now, because you make one difference, one selection that is different in a component, and now you've got kind of a unique sound, and you can put that out as a new pedal. Your question is, how much should you know? I think most people don't really know what's going on under the hood, and you probably don't need to know about what's going on circuit wise, but it's nice to know. I feel like if you really want to understand what the regeneration knob on a flanger is, or even on some of these phasers, I've got a few. I've got almost 30 phasers now. I'm a phaser freak. It's a problem, but anyways, like, what does that do? And when you start looking at the circuitry, you realize, oh, that's a feedback knob. That actually sends it back into the delay line, and therefore it kind of adds this kind of deeper texture to it, more pronounced flanging effect, or comb filtering effect to it. So it can be helpful, rather than just being like, oh, if I turn this knob, it has this sound. If I turn it this way, it has this other sound. That's useful enough, and I think you can get by doing that. But if you really want to understand why it's doing what it's doing, then look at some schematics. There's some great websites like Electro Smash that breaks down the different classic circuits. And another one is like Aeon Effects, and there's a few others. Small Bear Electronics has some breakdowns, some circuit breakdowns, so you can start to see kind of what those different components do. I think we just lost everybody.
No, it's incredible, because I think if you're listening to the audio version of this, it would be worth it to pop in and look at all our faces when you're talking about like taking this stuff apart,
Yeah, all your eyeballs rolling back in your head.
Especially when you said it was a life-threatening learning prospect. But I think I really love the depth, just listening to the depth and the creativity and the curiousness. And, it's not just, I think it's really valuable to diffuse that myth that it's not just like you plug into this thing and you put your foot on it and then you have your sound. Like, these are all tools, and you have to know how to use your tools. And I think listening to you talk about it just shows like how deep the ocean is, when you start to go right beneath. And so, as an artist, I think we all relate to what you get out of it. So I'm wondering, like, Colin, like, what do you value about your sound? Do you care about texture, color, or shape of your notes, or all of the above? And in what ways, like, can you put your finger on a few things that all of this knowledge and technology kind of leads you to as an artist?
Uh, yeah, that's exactly the point, right? Is like, if you don't have um, kind of intent behind what you do, and you're not always trying to search out like what makes what you play more expressive, then yeah, it's kind of all for naught. For me personally, music is a form of expression. It is an emotional transfer. It's a transfer of emotions. And we can do that with pitches. We can do that with rhythm. We can do that with dynamics. Um, and we can do it with any kind of expressive elements like vibrato and hammer-ons and pull-offs and slides and vibrato bar dips or whatever, right? We can convey all that stuff, but of course, sound is much more than just that in our day and age. I mean, you listen to the music that is being produced now with it's all pretty much computer based, and everything is textural, right? When you listen to like the intro of any pop song, there is like sounds that cannot be created with a an acoustic instrument. It's all being created with electronic sounds, and it transports us to a different place. And at the end of the day, I feel like if you can find things that resonate with you emotionally, then it's going to resonate with other people emotionally. And you just have to find what those feelings are within you when you play any effect or any instrument, whatever it is, and you start creating on that vibration or whatever you want to call that energy that is created within you, run with that and just keep going with that. See if you can maintain that feeling for the entire piece of music, and you'll come up with something powerful, not just for yourself, which will be incredibly gratifying, but I guarantee that other people will resonate with that too.
Cheryl, as we're coming to the end of this really cool discussion, what is on your mind for Colin?
Yeah, Colin. Well, I mean, it was really great to get into your thoughts about sound and that last part that you're just talking there about emotion, how sound conveys emotion is really deep. But I think overall, what I really uh, got out of this discussion that's inspiring is just the patience for the process and the curiosity that you need to dive into these things. And so thanks for sharing that with us. And I know students are really going to dig this and be also inspired by that. But just, when you're talking to about that time when you're at Berkeley and you were like, I can't get all this stuff done. Like, that's really important to hear that, because I went through that, I'm sure, at Berkeley, and all of us do. So I know a lot of students are going to identify with that and be like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy.
Yep.
And it just, be patient and dig in deep, take good notes, and it'll be there for you. So thanks for sharing that. I know people are going to really dig that.
Cool.
What about you, Ian?
Yeah, I like how you kind of came full circle there toward the end, where we were talking about you're talking about trying to find a unique voice earlier, and then through talking about pedals and through talking about this stuff that you're more of an expert on than certainly I am, for sure, and it's very alien to me. Then you use that to come back around to say, really explore those things that you really think are cool, because it means that you're onto something, right? And to develop it and to go deep with it and know it really well, practice it. So I really dug that, and I think that that's a really neat way of taking like a very specific specialty that you have and also connecting it to sort of these bigger universal things about music. That's
Yeah,
true for anybody, no matter what kind of style they
I
play or
agree.
what kind of
Yeah.
guitar they use, you know?
Right, and you don't need a lot of gear, you know. And here it's coming from someone who has this whole backdrop of just like oodles of gear, and you know, I just don't think that you need a whole. I think a couple cool pieces is all you need. You know, like you need a good instrument. You need something that you can be creatively comfortable on, right? That when you play, like it just translates right from your head and your heart into your hands, right? You don't need a lot of stuff, and you know, I've really felt strongly about this over the past year since we've, you know, had to go through this awful pandemic. Uh, that I feel like, again, it's kind of hypocritical of me to say this because I understand what we're seeing and what we're talking about here in my world, where I have just so much equipment. It looks like I am like a rabid consumer of electronic gear and music gear, and to some extent I am, but I'm not a collector. I'm not someone who just keeps stuff in a vault. I've chosen the pieces over my, you know, 30-year career based off of a specific sound profile that I do not have in my arsenal, and it fills that gap. And I need that sound because of, you know, certain projects, or you know, uh, being able to just fulfill a sonic ideal in my mind. And if I were to give any advice to people who are like trying to figure out how to you know, what pieces of gear to buy to develop their sound, I'd say, you know, experiment a lot, and don't be a consumer, but be a creator. Think of it from a creator mindset rather than a consumer mindset, right? Like when a new piece of gear hits the market, don't just be like, oh well, take my money, but figure out, like, you know, how does this enhance my creativity? How does this enhance my music? And will it or will it not help me do that? Um, and that gives you at least a little bit more justification. But furthermore, like all of this stuff that we see here in my room is absolutely replicable. You can build it yourself, and for a fraction of the cost. You know, a new boutique hand wired amp can run like $2,500 or something. Well, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of equipment and a little bit of study and you know, some experimentation. So that upfront cost might cost you a little bit, but you could build that same amp. I mean, components wise, it's about maybe $700. You know, and this creator mindset, I think, is going to, not to sound all like, you know, like, oh, you know, we're living in tough times and we need to save the world, but you know, like this consumer culture is kind of killing the planet, isn't it? I mean, kind of. So be more of a creator, put stuff out in the world for people to enjoy, and build things that you need for yourself. Somebody told me years ago that the world needs more fixers, and that really stuck with me. And I always wanted to be a fixer. I didn't want to like just throw stuff out when it broke. I wanted to be able to fix it and continue using it forever. And I feel like that can actually be really beneficial for any artist. So it kind of ties in with, like, you know, you are a creator musically, but you can be also a creator sonically with the gear that you make. And it's not that tough. If I can do it, and I'm doing this at kind of a later stage in my life and learning it on my own, you can certainly do it too. There are huge communities out there that will support you.
Thank you so much, Colin. And I think that's the perfect note to end on, because I think you've shown so much energy and passion. And I think that one thing that comes to mind when you talk is how important drive is, and how important, you know, you have the tenacity to work so hard. And sometimes there's a myth that if you have energy and you have creative passion, things just come together. And I think what you've really shown today in our hour together is that that stuff is great, and it only really comes to fruition through drive and depth and just the tenacity that you've had throughout your musical life to find your artistic voice and see every opportunity in your gig life and your teaching life as an application of that. So I can't think of a more perfect way to end. And hope we get to have another coffee sometime soon.
Yes. Thank you for having me. This has been a lot
Yeah,
of
thank
fun.
you for being here. So I'm just going to sign off by saying thank you to Professor Colin Sapp. Thank you, Ian Steed, and thank you, Cheryl Bailey. And we'll be with you on the next Coffee Talk.